not to spoil anything too much, you read all of Volume 5
I
instead
did,
of
and
reading.
we won't obviously go on to the Lost Children arc here.
Yes, Lost Children chapter is kind of the opening mini arc of the Conviction arc, and so you did only absorb part of a story, so I can understand if your feelings towards that are quite negative at the moment.
My feelings towards the Eclipse arc were far more negative, but we can get into that when it happens.
That's fair, but imagine for Conviction if you had watched Glass up to the point where all of the main characters die and then switched it off.
What, like most people that walked out of the theatre and then didn't get the ending? And then actually, funnily enough, for the last episode of Comics Corner, we got a lot of comments saying, oh, well, I actually appreciated your recontextualizing. I've salvaged the film for you. So.
Thank you, as always, for the positive comments that we've received on the previous episodes. It was a real pleasure to see that the people who had gone back and watched through our Unbreakable trilogy review had gone back and revisited the films themselves and been able to appreciate them in a different light. That's one of the more rewarding things that we get out of doing this series. So thank you very much again. But yeah, like, imagine if you'd got the everyone's dead and then you switched it off. That's the kind of sour taste that would be left in your mouth without experiencing the more positive aspects of the rest of the story as it carries on. So, you know, if we end up going through Conviction arc, which if we do a part 2 on Berserk, that will be what we do, then hopefully you'll be able to see that there was more light in the story than is initially suggested by the opening chapters, because it is reintroducing us to the very bleak world that Guts is inhabiting in the Black Swordsman arc. But just because we've made mention of it and everybody at the screen is probably going, they've not mentioned it yet, come on, say it. Kentaro Miura sadly did pass away about 2 years ago in 2021. I don't know the exact illness that he passed away from, but he was not able to finish the series because post around 2006, as far as I'm aware, he began to take extended hiatuses from the series. In the later years of the 2010s, he'd also started to work on 2 other separate series, the names of which I can't remember right now. But he was trying to split his time between doing different things because, you know, he'd been working on Berserk for about 30 years at that point, and it probably gets to the point where it's not like a George R.R. Martin situation with The Song of Ice and Fire when it's just clear at this point that he's not interested in the series at all, but he was still interested in the series. He loved the characters. It's obviously what brought him his fame, but he wanted to work on other things at the same time. But that did mean that he was taking longer and longer breaks. There were some chapters where he would only release a few chapters in a single year. Then you'd have to wait another year to get more things. So the last arc that he was working on, Fantasia, was not completed before he passed away. But happily, his best friend Koji Mori, who was both involved in the development of the narrative early on, so knows where the story would be going, and also the assistants who were helping him with his art near the past few years of his life before he died, because he moved to a bigger studio, got a few assistants to help him so that he could get them to replicate his art style in a way that was satisfying to him so that they could help speed up the process a little bit. They are going to be carrying on the series in his name. I know that they have been releasing some chapters, which, as far as I'm aware from feedback that I've heard from other people, have been positively received and think that they're carrying it on in a way that is respectful to Miura's memory. So that's excellent to hear. And also it's interesting because Mori himself is somebody, along with Miura's friends that he made at college when he was doing an art class at college, were the basis of some of the characters that we get throughout the series. Obviously, like all writers, there is somewhat autobiographical elements to his work. Guts, he's said a number of times, was partially based on himself, partially based on Mori, but Mori seemed more, from what I've seen in the research, to be the basis of Griffith's character. And he's described the relationship between Guts and Griffith. While you can take some romantic overtones, specifically in a kind of one-sided direction, Griffith seems to idolize Guts in a way. Guts respects Griffith and idolizes Griffith in a way where, you know, he sees him as somebody to an ideal to aspire to, something to his ideals are something that he wants to live up to. This idea that we'll get to of the dream, being able to chase your dream, forge your own path in life. But Griffith does seem to have a bit more of a complicated and entangled relationship with Guts, where he is... It's hinted a number of times that he might be a little bit in love with him.
See, I until Volume 5, and I do wonder if the events of Volume 5 are done entirely out of spite, we can get to that. I saw Guts seeing Griffith as a leader, eventually, and Griffith being scorned at the fact that Guts wouldn't become his lover. And that's the dichotomy I saw playing out, and then it takes... you think it's going to zig, and then it zags.
I think there are elements to that, but I wouldn't say entirely. I think the relationship is a bit more complicated than that. But Miura, from what I've seen, said that he believed that the relationship between Guts and Griffith was more emblematic of male friendship, just in general. The complicated nature of whether you... how you interact with one another, how you idealize one another, how you can become connected to one another in a more platonic style.
I think from Guts' perspective, definitely, that was really good. I think Griffith literally wanted to own Guts in the way that a very controlling ex would. So...
But anyway, now that we've gone through a lot of that preamble, I hope you've not been too frustrated by all of that so far. Let's go through a bit of the narrative. So it starts off with the Black Swordsman, which is starts off in media res, to use a bit of terminology. If you're not familiar with that, it means it starts off in the middle of the story. As far as I'm aware of the timeline, it starts off somewhere around a third of the way into the narrative on the overall timeline. And then when you get to the Golden Age arc, that's when it goes all the way back to the beginning, literally back to the beginning.
You see his birth.
Well, you don't see his birth, you see his afterbirth.
Well, you see
in
him...
in a rather nasty way.
Yeah, having fallen out of the womb of a corpse.
Yes, hence his name Guts.
Yeah.
But the opening scene that you see of him is, I think in retrospect, a little bit strange to go back to when you know the context of what's going on. It sets up the tone and sets up the atmosphere very nicely, this kind of brutal, uncompromising, dark atmosphere. But you get Guts having sex with a woman. That's what you open onto. And when I first read it the first time, before I got these deluxe editions, it was kind of a bit of a surprise to me. It's like, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those sorts of series. He's having sex with a woman, the woman turns into a demon, you get a big double-page spread of her turning into a demon.
We've all been there on a Saturday night, lads. One too many beers.
Yeah, it's quite a relatable situation to be in. And then Guts puts she thinks she's got him in her clutches. She's like, I'm going to kill you now. And he just puts his arm cannon in her face and blows her away. And that's your introduction to what is obviously supposed to be. And I think Miura, as far as I can tell, didn't have much of a plan for the series beyond, I want a cool, badass guy to go out and kill demons and be emotionally conflicted and dark while he's doing it.
And have his pixie sidekick. Because midway through, I think it's
the first chapter.
I think it's in volume 5, you see sort of test chapter that he had before he started writing the actual full narrative.
Yes. It's kind of awkwardly placed, because I think that's...
It's horrendously placed,
yeah, it's really awkwardly placed in the volumes, but I believe that's in the timeline of when they released the prototype chapter up for public consumption. So I do just think to myself, guys, Dark Horse, you published these beautiful editions. You could have just slotted it in right at the end so it didn't break up the pacing of the narrative, but that's just a different subject altogether. One of the things I will say actually about these deluxe editions, one of the only real disappointments with them, is that when you get the pages that are more shaded in, like at the beginning, especially in Black Swordsman, you'll get a few pages at the beginning of each chapter that's shaded in much more.
I noticed that.
Those are, from what I've read online, supposed to be in full colour.
Yeah.
And Dark Horse, for whatever reason, chose to do them in shaded rather than full colour, which is a little bit disappointing, guys. Come on, you could have just given us that. It wouldn't have cost that much extra to include a little bit extra multicoloured ink.
With gloss pages, I agree. It's like when people...
They have the gloss pages at the end of each volume of the... page of the front covers of each of the individual paperback volumes, but they just didn't do it for those ones for some reason.
It's like the great disappointment that many people had when they bought the absolute Alan Moore Swamp Thing volumes and found out they'd been digitally recoloured.
I mean, at least with The Killing Joke, you get the original colouring and the digital recolouring. And I know you prefer the digital recolouring.
I prefer Boland's,
For people like myself who prefer the original colouring, it's just a nice thing to have both of them. But, so you get that, and it kind of sets him up as this enigmatic, silent hero. Well, dark hero, anti-hero, who he then goes into a town, he goes into a pub and finds that there's a bunch of mercenaries there who are from the local Coca Castle, and which is one of the only named places early on. And that's, I think, another sign that Miura wasn't thinking about how he's going to expand the world at the time. He was just like, I just want a cool story. I just want cool situations for a big guy with a big sword and a cannon on his arm who's only got one eye because it's really cool to go and kill demons in. And I respect that. I respect that. And if nothing else, it's very impressive how he managed to go back later and tie all of that together in a way that did make sense with the world. But he goes in and finds these mercenaries abusing a tiny little elf called Puck, it later turns out. And Puck is somebody that I had mixed feelings on to begin with. I'm beginning to warm to him more as a character now, and I know that you...
Here's where my criticisms come in.
Let's hear it then. So, for those unfamiliar, Puck is just an elf. Guts saves him, not because he was intending to save him, more just because he wanted to intimidate the guards and get a message across to the guy who's in Coca Castle, who's running the whole town now. He ends up getting tortured. Puck comes out and saves him, and Guts ends up drawing the main villain of that particular chapter, the snake demon man who's terrorizing the town, out. And the guy terrorizes the town a little bit. You see him brutally murdering women and children and such, which is a recurring theme throughout the entire series, which is the bad guys don't really care about human casualties, whether they're men, women, children, which for a medieval setting, dark medieval fantasy setting, is pretty typical as far as I'm concerned. And then, he ends up killing him in a really badass way. And Puck tags along. So what do you think of Puck?
Right, my frustration with Puck, I'd like to summarize. I think it takes the worst parts of the fairy from Zelda in his intrusiveness, the fourth wall breaking of modern Harley Quinn in trying to endear them to the audience by making them whimsical and excessive comedic relief. And I think he is a moral hammer to beat the audience with. So I think Puck is there to make up for the deficiency of morality within the world by telling Guts what the audience want to grab him and tell him. So when he nearly smites a child in Volume 5, for example, and that's ahead of the Eclipse arc.
No, he almost murders multiple children throughout the series. And once again, it's a recurring theme. Guts is not the most morally upstanding character.
No, and it's because he's incredibly nihilistic, and so he just thinks, I've just got to get the job done to avenge Casca, and he has his blinders on, and a lot of the time you as a reader want to go, that's despicable, come on man, you don't need to do this. It feels like rather than have the subtlety of the Golden Age with this underlying tension between the characters be slowly worked out, it feels like Puck is just a mouthpiece, a moral soapbox for what the audience would want to tell Guts if he was there. So it kind of takes me out of it. And also deliberately takes you out of it when Puck references at one point, this narrative would be really dark without me. And it feels like Miura is trying to justify having his comedic relief character in there when it's really jarring otherwise. So I just don't appreciate the character. I think the narrative is a lot better without it.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.